Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, Rotarians, guests, UN delegates. Thank you for coming today to one of our most popular and largest events in the Rotary world. Welcome to the Peace and Conflict Resolution Panel. Can everybody hear me? Okay. I'm Helen Reisler, a Rotary International representative to the United Nations and the panel moderator. We have 4 panelists today who are dedicated to the peace effort and helping to solve conflicts in various ways. Hold your questions till the very end of all the presentations, and then you'll have time to ask the questions that I'm sure you'll want to ask. We're going to start with our first panelist, Darren Moss, originally from Brisbane in Australia. He's a lawyer. He graduated as a Rotary World Peace Fellow from the University of North Carolina with a master's degree in political science, focusing on international security challenges. He's now a political advisor to the UN, and he's going to tell you about his role in the peace effort. Darren?
Thank you very much, Helen. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, Rotarians. I apologise, I'm not wearing a tie. When I arrived, I took one off to try and sort of be hip with the young Rotaractors that were outside. They were still better dressed than me, and now I just look a little slovenly for you. So I'll apologise, but let's forget that and box on. I also should say, by way of disclaimer, I am working for the UN, but I represent here today myself, and the views are my own as opposed to those of the UN, just in case my boss is watching on the webcast or the live feed. Let's just keep that between us. Ladies and gentlemen, by way of brief introduction, I guess to build on what Helen said, or Helen introduced, I graduated from law school in 1998 and from the University of North Carolina and the University of Queensland again in 2004. Along the way, I've worked in the courts, I've worked in counter-terrorism and in anti-corruption. I was a teacher for 4 years, ran workshops in prison for 2 years, and was arrested in the Ukraine once. In that time, I've learned that kids are honest, devious and hilarious. I have about the same prison currency value as 1.5 packets of Lucky Strikes, and the Ukrainian police have no sense of humour about their hats. I have worked on issues in that time, both profane and profound. I've sat in the Sacred Spirit Hut in the north of Canada, listening to First Nations elders describe a community that went from 98% alcoholism and the edge of genuine extinction to sobriety and success within a generation. And I've sat in a meeting with a dungeon master imploring me to regulate the bondage industry, and had a strip club owner appoint me as his lawyer because he felt, and I quote, "we had a connection." I don't know where he got that from. More recently, I was the Chief of Staff to 2 Attorneys General in Queensland, Australia, 2 genuinely decent men who, under my sage stewardship, both successfully lost their seats. And I worked on policing in East Timor, police who I'd like to think, again with my assistance, shot almost no one seriously in the 2012 elections. And even though in 2012 I was accused of firing Islamabad's Justice Minister by a drunk Pakistani spy, the following year I returned to South Asia, providing advice and analysis on Afghan politics as part of the UN peacekeeping mission, providing advice and analysis on politics in much the same way that a Jack Russell Terrier provides advice and analysis to a burglar, at high volume and mostly in terror. And now, after 3 years, I'm now working in conflict and post-conflict resolution, or working in those environments. I've come to roost in New York in Hell's Kitchen, which, after my mother thought that Afghanistan was terrible, she decided that that was an even more dangerous place. There can be little doubt, I think, that the path that I've taken, albeit one with ventures down roads, both paved and unpaved, well-trodden and not, has been assisted greatly, I should say, from the outset, and guided by the work of Rotary. The Rotary motto itself, service above self, remains, in my view, a core principle of how I've sought to pursue my professional life. though I must confess after taking that job in Afghanistan, I think Mum would have preferred something more along the lines of "te current quasi infernus," which would be the Latin translation of "run like hell." But anyway, we survived. It's okay. I do believe in service, in applying our gifts to the betterment of the community and not just to ourselves. I believe in equality, that the treatment we receive and the rights we fight for in life should not be conditional upon our gender, our religion, our race, our wealth, or our sexual preference. And I believe in optimism and in opportunity, that it's possible that even during the darkest and most dangerous, terrible and stressful times, that it's possible to make tomorrow better than today. And if ever there was a place in modern history that has required a belief in service, a belief in equality, and that has required optimism and a certain cautious recklessness and a desire to make tomorrow better than today, then that would surely be Afghanistan. And if ever there was an organisation that met that sense of service, then for me it certainly is the United Nations. I am unashamedly an idealist, even if the grinding machinery of an organisation the size and scope of the UN can try to pulp that out of one. And I firmly believe that the United Nations is the first, last and best hope for global peace. It's worth considering for a moment in this context what the magnitude of the task that the United Nations is attempting to achieve in the area of peacekeeping, peace building and peacemaking, and the mechanism that the UN has been given to achieve it. Between 2007 and 2014, there has been a nearly 300% increase in the number of active civil wars across the globe. 60 million people are now either refugees or internally displaced persons, and in 2015 alone, the global humanitarian call for need was in the area of $20 billion in assistance. That is quite simply no small issue. The UN in that context is an organisation of 193 member states. It has 15 specialised agencies, 6 principal organs and 6 official languages. In response to peace and conflict needs, the UN has 16 current peacekeeping operations and 11 peace and peace-building missions across the globe. With respect to peacekeeping, the budget for the UN is just over $8 billion. If $8 billion sounds like a lot to pay for peace, then to put that significant sounding figure into context, it's worth noting that the citizens of US and Europe spend about $12 billion annually on perfume. McDonald's has an annual operating budget of $19.5 billion, and Americans spend approximately $60 billion a year on their pets. If trans fats, perfumes and pugs are an unfair comparison, then consider that while the world is spending about $8 billion on peacekeeping through the UN, last year it racked up $1,767 billion in global military expenditure. That basically equates to $242 per person across the world spent on the military and just over $1 spent on peacekeeping. For that $1, what do we get? Well, for the UN, that means about 125,000 troops, police and civilians working across 7 million square kilometres of territory, assisting about 125 million people. More broadly in the context, the UN provides food to 90 million people in 80 countries. It vaccinates 58% of the world's children, saving 3 million lives per year. It assists 40 million refugees and persons fleeing war, a number which unfortunately is increasing. It fights poverty and improves health and well-being for 420 million rural poor. It mobilised $22 billion, I'm not good with numbers, it mobilised $22 billion in humanitarian aid to help people affected by emergencies, currently assists 67 countries a year with their elections, and has saved the lives of 30 million women a year through improved maternal health. Those are some pretty good results. And it does this, I should note, as a member state organisation, an organisation built on the necessity for cooperation, for agreement, and for better and worse, compromise. In many ways, there really is no UN. It's just a clubhouse where 193 member states have agreed to turn up and agreed to meet. And if they don't want to meet, then they don't meet. And if they don't want to agree, then again, for better and for worse, they simply don't agree. The amazing thing is, and the thing that it is difficult, or easy, I should say, to forget sometimes when we focus on some of the perceived failures, is that by and large, the UN does mean that people meet, and they do meet, and they meet peacefully. They decide, and sometimes it's slow, but they do decide, and above all, as above the results attest to, the UN does act. My part in all of this is pretty small, but so it goes, I guess, for everybody working in this kind of field. I work on Afghanistan now in the United Nations in New York as a political advisor. And I'll just take a quick second then to look at the scope of Afghanistan and the scope of the issue there. Afghanistan is a landlocked country of about 34 million people currently fighting a war against, it would appear, everybody, including themselves, including the most powerful war machine in history at one point or another. And still nobody is able to declare definitive victory. It's a nation that sat at the crossroads of civilization for thousands of years, a trading hub, a gateway between South and Central Asia, between East and what's known as the Middle East. It has been the subject to invasion and attempted colonial subjugation, of religious fusion and of religious conflict, and it's become home to violent extremism as well as fighting a bloody domestic conflict against violent extremism. And to be frank, it's in a neighbourhood that some might say is not exactly at times a galaxy of stars. You have Tajikistan, which is recovering from 7 years of civil war, Turkmenistan, which according to the World Press Freedom Index of 2012 was only ranked above North Korea in terms of the worst press freedom, and that's not a great metric to be just beating the North Koreans, with all due respect to them. And Pakistan, where the intelligence service has allegedly been previously simultaneously fighting and funding the Taliban with equal fervour, and that's just to name three. That's a challenging environment for any country to be in. It's a challenging environment for Afghanistan. It's a country where there's 2 official languages, Dari and Pashto, 2 unofficial languages, Uzbek and Turkmen, and about 30 other languages. So it's obviously very lucky that they sent me there, a tall, inconspicuous white guy who can't grow sideburns, who speaks moderately good English, very poor Japanese, and a little bit of Portuguese. It's a devoutly Muslim country, so again, I'm not exactly sure how I was going to fit in, but after all, I was born a Methodist, raised Uniting, schooled Anglican, married a Catholic, and was asked by a former employee to go to a strip club with an atheist and a Buddhist nun. That actually is a true story. And it's a country where politics is a full contact sport. But I was ready. I said to myself, I'm ready. I've worked in Australian politics. It's okay. It's just a different tune. But as the old saying goes, if the difference between kinky and perverted is the difference between using the feather and using the whole chicken, then for Australian politics, even at their most kinky, can barely hold a candle to the full chicken freakout that is Afghan politics in full flight. Family and friends have often said that it's hopeless to try and provide political advice to a country like Afghanistan, where it's comprised, it would appear, of local warlords, opium bandits and Islamic extremists. And that nothing has worked and nothing will ever work. And yes, it's absolutely difficult. And yes, there have been problems. This is a country where you've had war for the better part of the last 30 years most recently, but as a consequence, it's likely to take another 30 years for peace to break out, and that process is just underway. And while the last decade has certainly seen spectacular expenditure and, to an extent, spectacular wasted expenditure in the country, the US alone has spent an estimated $660 million since 2002, the news, I don't think, is all doom and gloom, and the United Nations has been at the very heart of that. In 2001, over a third of the population, give or take about 6 million men, women and children, had fled the country that had devolved into civil war, and the Taliban took over. And around 1 in 10 at that time had been killed. There was virtually no healthcare, the education system was stalled and services didn't function. Kabul was an eerie ghost town and Al-Qaeda was having a gay old time. By 2014, just over a decade later, nearly 5 million of those refugees have returned to Afghanistan, and at no small personal risk. And to just pick out a few other figures to highlight the seismic changes that the country has undergone, there are nearly twice the number of doctors per capita. Maternal mortality has been reduced by about 80%. Child mortality has been reduced by 60%. Telephone users have increased and therefore communication by around 19 million people. In 2001, there were about 1 million, mostly boys, in fact primarily boys, in primary school education. Now there are 10 million boys and girls in schools across the country. And finally, in what is probably the most stunning shift in that time, the average life expectancy in Afghanistan has increased 18 years, from 42 or about 42 in 2001 to around 63 now. That is a massive shift in a very small period of time. That is a laudable and concrete achievement for both the Afghan people, for the United Nations and for the community as a whole. And I know Rotary has certainly been a part of that through their Polio Plus program, to name just one program, which is really doing fantastic work in a number of areas in Afghanistan. What saddens me most about the state of the world at the moment, and I know Helen's looking at me because she's probably going to tell me to shut it down very quickly. What saddens me most about the state of politics, and I think what draws me to the work that I do at the moment, is how small we want to be. How small countries such as Australia, such as the US, such as parts of Europe are increasingly wanting to be. Less aid funding, fear of refugees, terror of gay marriage, a viewpoint of the world that would rather exclude than embrace. And at the time when many of these countries are the economic envy of the world, when the quality of life is nearly unparalleled at any other time as it has been on the planet, we appear to be shrinking away in fear, trying to be less relevant, trying to be less compassionate, trying to even be less leaders. In short, we're obsessed with the differences that divide us as opposed to those things that bring us together. And I will admit that there are genuine terrors in the world. There are systems of belief that I firmly believe we should reject and oppose mightily. And ISIS, ISIL, Daesh, whatever you want to be called, I'm looking right at you. But we certainly can't let that justifiable concern about the small, very small aspect of humanity diminish our desire to join, embrace and explore the rest of humanity. In conclusion, that reminds me, and I'll just finish with this, I promise I'll finish, Helen, of a story by Emo Phillips about when he was walking across a bridge and he met a man who was about to jump off. He said, I was walking across a bridge one day and I saw a man who was standing on the edge and was about to jump off the edge of the bridge, and I ran over and I said, stop, don't do it. And the man said, well, why shouldn't I? And he said, well, look, you've got so much to live for. He said, like what? Well, I said, are you religious or atheist? And he said, I'm religious. And he said, oh, me too. And he said, are you Christian or Buddhist? And the man said, Christian. He said, me too. He said, are you Catholic or Protestant? He said, Protestant. He said, me too. Are you Episcopalian or Baptist? He said, Baptist. He said, me too. Are you Baptist Church of God or Baptist Church of the Lord? He said, Baptist Church of God. He said, me too. Are you Original Baptist Church of God or are you Reformed Baptist Church of God? He said, look, I'm Reformed Baptist Church of God. Me too. He said, are you Reformed Baptist Church of God, Reformation of 1879? Are you Reformed Baptist Church of God, Reformation of 1915? He said, Reformed Baptist Church of God, Reformation of 1915. I said, die heretic scum, and I pushed him off. Ladies and gentlemen, what we need to do is focus on the things that draw us together. Peace and conflict is a massive challenge. Rotary is doing sensational work and it is partnering with the UN. My simple message today would be to continue that partnership, embrace the differences, explore the differences and bridge those gaps. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you had any doubt that our Peace Fellow scholarships were not working, I'm sure you have changed your mind. Thank you, Darren. Our next speaker is Carla Lineback. Carla was a Peace Fellow at the International Christian University in Japan and received a master's degree in peace studies. She is a member of Brattleboro Rotary Club in Vermont and has had 20 years of experience working with youth on programs focusing on cross-cultural understanding and conflict resolution. And now you're in for another interesting experience. Carla.
Thank you, Helen. That's going to be a tough act to follow, and I can promise you mine is not going to be nearly as humorous. I'd like to start talking a little bit about me to help put things into context. I was born in Vermont, a place that is not considered very multicultural, to say the least. My mother is from Bolivia, and my father was Italian American, and I was raised speaking both Spanish and English at home in rural Vermont. I spent 10 of my childhood summers in Mexico while my parents were running programs there. And I studied, my junior year I spent in Italy. I graduated Smith with a degree in Italian language and literature, because that surely was going to prepare me for a great career. I spent 3 years in Japan teaching English, and I traveled a little bit teaching English in different countries, including Venezuela. My entire career has been in education, whether it was teaching languages or creating cross-cultural understanding. I led groups of high school students on homestay-based summer abroad programs. Some of you might recognize the name, The Experiment in International Living. As I said, I taught English overseas. I've always worked for creating friendships across cultures, so I think that's not unusual or unfamiliar for the Rotarians here. Creating peace through understanding. When I was working for The Experiment, it was a job I loved, and I decided that I wanted to have more impact. I could have continued with The Experiment forever. It was a job I felt had an impact with students. It was making a difference. But I wanted something a little bit more, and that's when I found the Rotary World Peace Fellow Program. And I have to say this, thank you all. Through the generosity of the Rotarians and the Rotary Foundation, I went back to Japan, and I received a 2-year master's degree in peace studies. Part of my studies included a month in the Middle East, in the divided capital city of Nicosia in Cyprus. I'm sorry, two different separate months. One in the Middle East, Syria, Jordan, and Israel, and then another month in Cyprus. The highlight of my Rotary Peace Fellow Program, I think, was the network that I entered into. Colleagues like Darren working with the UN. Just to give you a snapshot, my cohort, I had a classmate whose career is in preventing human trafficking, another whose interest was working with child soldiers. One now is in the Foreign Service. Another classmate is still in Japan. One's a professor. One pursued a PhD in sustainable agriculture. You get the idea. We come from all different backgrounds, and we're all tackling the same problem from different points of view. I think that's really the beauty of the program. I came back to the US, and I returned to Vermont, which was always my plan. Vermont is home to me. My professional life, I'm an Associate Dean for Academic Affairs for the School for International Training. It's the academic arm of World Learning. It's an organization that focuses on education, development, and exchange programs around the world. Locally and personally, I'm currently the president of a newly merged organization that works with homelessness and hunger in southern Vermont. And I was looking at the Sustainable Development Goals here in the back of the program, and number 1, no poverty, number 2, 0 hunger. That's what I'm working towards. My life has been very much about cross-cultural understanding, and I realized I was missing and lacking that international perspective in my day-to-day life. I was able to work one summer with a Mexican program, working with Mexican youth on anti-violence developing anti-violence projects for high school students. That got the wheels turning in my head, and through the Rotary Network, I met up with another Peace Fellow, connected with Patricia Schaefer in North Carolina, and with the support of some Rotarians, we created New Gen Peace Builders. I did put out a few brochures. I have more, but this will tell you all about it. New Gen Peace Builders, what is it? Well, a wise man, Mahatma Gandhi, said, if we are to teach real peace in the world, we will have to begin with the children, and that's what we believe. When you ask young kids, most say they learn about war and conflict, but they never study peace, and that's what we wanted to do. We wanted to get young people talking about peace. New Gen Peace Builders has a mission to make learning to be a peace builder a rite of passage for everyone. We launched in 2013. And it takes the content and the best practices of peace education programs typically available to master's degree candidates, and we redesigned the experience for high school students. We treat these young people as 21st century peace builders. We combine theory and practice. We've taken the best of our experiences as Peace Fellows and the experiences we've had with Rotarians and put them into practice. How many Rotarians have been involved in peace projects or projects around the world that improve a situation? That's what we're working with these high school students. We've integrated the program with Rotarian mentors to help these students put together a peace project. It's a program that is endorsed by the Rotary Action Group for Peace, and we also see it as a funnel to create to plant the seed for these high school students to think about the Rotary World Peace Fellow program, a funnel towards a program that you already put together. Just to give you an example of some of the projects that the students work on, one group of students in North Carolina learned about the concept of urban food deserts. Just out of curiosity, how many of you here are familiar with the concept of an urban food desert? Okay, a few. Well, it's essentially vast areas where it's almost impossible to find and buy fresh produce. And this is here in the United States. These students went to a part of Charlotte they never would have otherwise gone, you know, in their normal lives. And they met and they spoke with low-income single mothers who were affected by the fact that they can't get their hands on fresh produce. The students came up with a plan and recruited other students to volunteer. They convinced the school to rehabilitate a campus greenhouse to cultivate seedlings to distribute to these families for a grow your own project. Making fresh produce available to low-income families makes a lot of difference. They realize the students, you know, for the students, it's about learning how one little thing can impact the big scenario. They realize that fresh produce leads to healthier families. It means that kids miss school less often. It means that parents don't miss work as often. It brings a little more stability to their homes. It means that they might be able to actually pay rent and get ahead on rent and move to a larger apartment. I mean, there's a domino effect. It's an example of positive peace, one of the concepts that we introduce our high school students to. New Gen Peace Builders has been going strong in Charlotte thanks to startup grants from Rotary clubs in the area. Rotarians and a Peace Fellow are currently now in Bolivia delivering 3 concurrent programs. We're working on expanding the program in Mexico, Thailand, Hong Kong, Ghana, and South Sudan. In the US, we continue to offer the program in Charlotte, and we're working on expanding in Ohio and California. And we've recently just got interest from Florida. I'm in Vermont, and I'm just going to pitch it here. My calendar is open. I'm excited to offer the program in your area if you'd like to learn more. There are brochures, and I'm happy to talk to you after this. Just to finish, a quote from one of the participants. Just because we're young, it doesn't mean we can't do things to encourage peace. It doesn't mean we can't make a difference. Thank you.
Of such meaningful work as a Rotarian and a Graduate Peace Fellow. And doesn't someone like Carla give you hope for the next generation? See, these are the things that balance off ISIS and all the other stuff. Thank you so much, Carla. And now, you're in for another treat. We have 2 Rotaractors. One is a lawyer, one is a doctor, one comes from Greece, one comes from Serbia, and they're going to tell you about how they contribute to the peace effort. Mina, right? Mina Vasovic and Danae Becker are both members of Rotaract clubs. Mina in Belgrade, Serbia, and Danae in northern Greece. Mina is a medical doctor specializing in radiology, while Danae is a lawyer, mediator, and arbitrator. They both have participated in model UN conferences recently in Belgrade, Serbia. Was it in Belgrade? Yes. Mina and Danae will show you what this has to do with peace, and they're going to do it together. They have a PowerPoint.
Thank you. Dear fellow Rotarians and Rotaractors, it is my great pleasure and honor to be here today with my lovely Secretary General at this special day and to tell you about our project, Rotaract Global Model United Nations, that is so important to us that we put our hearts and souls into it. At the beginning, let me introduce myself. My name is Mina Vasovic and I come from Belgrade, Serbia. I am a medical doctor. I work at the National Cancer and Research Center in Belgrade. Over 7 last years, I have been a member of Rotaract Club Belgrade, the oldest club in our district. I served as a club president and a district Rotaract representative, and I was the project manager of Rotaract Global Model United Nations, 3rd edition, that was held this August in Belgrade. But at the beginning, I'm a believer. I believe in medicine, and I believe that my work can make a difference. I believe in volunteering work. I believe that small changes can move mountains, and that the world will be a better place if all of us would do something. I believe in constant education and self-improvement as a constant need of a human being. I believe that young people should have a voice that is loud enough to be heard. And the last but not the least, I believe in Rotaract Global Model United Nations as a platform for youth diplomacy and decision-making. How many of you here are familiar with the concept of Model United Nations? Oh, nice. So I will be brief then. Why is this so special to us? Rotaract Global Model United Nations is a youth conference where participants from different countries take role as delegates, like the real UN diplomats, and following the historical structure of United Nations, debate in formal sessions about issues that are political, social, and economic, that are current, and write the resolutions at the end of the conference. It is a great opportunity to learn how to influence decision-making on an international level. This conference is special because it is organized each year from... I just realized we have a PowerPoint. Yeah. You're
supposed to be clicking?
Yes, I'm clicking. Okay.
I'll move it up.
Thank you. So this conference takes place each year in a different country, and it's organized by a different Rotaract club. The first edition was held in Romania 3 years ago. The second edition was in London last year, and my club and me had the honor to do the third edition this August in Belgrade. As you can see, we have more than 70 participants from 20 countries, 25 nationalities, and our participants came from really various range of countries, from Colombia to Japan and Australia. And by modeling UN, we encourage young people and their knowledge in international affairs, in research, in understanding of parliamentary procedure, in analytical reasoning, in problem solving, negotiation, oral and written presentation of ideas, and also the professionalism. By working together as a team, we are trying to learn from the past and present and strive to prepare youth for the future and empower them to be more involved in decision-making. Our mission is to promote and encourage awareness, understanding, tolerance, peace, and acceptance of world's people, cultures, beliefs, and attitudes. I would like to share with you one of the most emotional moments during the conference, and believe me, since this was my first MUN experience, I had a lot of them. Last 5 years, I have been driving through the same streets of Belgrade every morning from my house to my work. But around this spring, something began to change. And believe me, I'm not a morning person, so if I noticed, it was a big change. You could see a lot of people in public squares and public parks, especially around the train stations and the bus stations. Those people were sitting or sleeping on the ground, and during all day, even some of them had small children with them. Those were the refugees from Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, and it is estimated that from the beginning of the refugee crisis, more than 1 million people has passed through Serbia. Unfortunately, this wasn't the first time for me to see a huge number of refugees, since I come from Serbia, a land who struggled with war 20 years ago. But still, I was really struck with the level of the destruction this refugee crisis brought with it. Around the same time, me and my club was working really hard on planning this Model UN, and we decided that one of the topics should be definitely about the refugee crisis. So the 26th of August has arrived. Our lovely participants from many countries arrived. We had a beautiful gala dinner. We were all fancy, and the conference take off. But that's the moment when we decided to make this conference completely different from all other Model United Nations. We decided to take our participants to that same park where the refugees have been spending their days. And I can't even describe how a person from Germany or from United Kingdom looked and probably felt when saw these scared, hungry, tired, huge crowds of people and felt their desperation. You can agree that it is completely different to see something like that on the TV and to feel it in person. That was a crucial moment for our conference because our participants felt that desperation. And they felt like they have to make a change, that it is up to them. There were no more politicians and no more some other people making difference. They were the people who should make a difference. Another thing that was really important for those beautiful resolutions, those bright minds, right, was that we were convinced them that their resolutions are going to be heard and presented after the conference and not leave as a letter on a paper. That was the moment when Rotaractors from 25 countries made a difference and made a huge effort to make peace. I think we should all learn from this because it's the same in the real life. Youth has a voice, a smart one and a strong one, but it is not heard oftenly. Peace should be upon young people, and I'm sure that young people would engage more in the decision-making process if they knew somebody is going to listen, instead saying, oh, what do you know about that topic or serious question? You're too young for that. So I'm asking you, no, I am trying to beg that you look around yourself and listen to young people around you. You would be really surprised what they have to tell you. And another thing, please help us spread the word about Rotaract Global Model United Nations and make this a huge and a global initiative because it can make a difference and it is a life-changing experience. Thank you.
We have started listening to our young people in Rotary. We've started to really take them seriously, and we have to continue to do that. Will you continue the presentation now, Janae?
Thank you very much. Dear Rotarians, dear Rotaractors, my name is Danai Beckham. I am from Greece, as you said. I am a lawyer and a mediator. I'm president of Rotaract Club Aristotelini in Thessaloniki, Greece. And I was the Secretary General of this year's Rotaract Global Model United Nations. Now, I'm going to continue where Mina left off by sharing a personal experience I had. When I was a little girl and I had just started realizing what is going on around me, I was shocked. It was about 15 years ago when I understood there was a reality outside my house that I could not understand. I could not understand why wars took place. I could not understand why people were starving to death. And I actually remember going to my parents and telling them that there's a crazy reality going on that I cannot control and I do not know what to do about it. It's like I'm at the theater, which I always loved, and I'm watching this crazy show and I can just hope for a happy ending without being able to do anything. And I really remember that moment when my dad told me, okay, let's say you're at the theater. What do you do when you're at the theater? I say, you buy a ticket, you watch the show, and you hope for your happy ending, probably. He said, well, it depends on where you're standing. If you're downstage, yes, you can just watch the show, but you can always choose to go upstage, and you can act and just make the ending you're wishing, okay? And this is the moment where I decided I wanted to become a Rotaractor. This is the moment where I decided I should start getting involved with the United Nations, and to be a lawyer, for that matter, to help people. So basically, I'm going to tell you a bit about MUN as well, and why this particular MUN is different from any other I have participated in. As Mina said, an MUN, and I'm not going to be very technical about it, is a simulation of the United Nations proceedings. Okay, most of you know that, and I saw your hands, so maybe you have participated already. But how does it help you? How does it contribute to preserving peace? Well, first of all, it is very, very challenging because you have to forget your personal beliefs and you have to represent another country. You have to discuss very crucial issues of the international community by basically being someone else. That means you have to put yourself in someone else's shoes, understand their policy line and why they have adopted it, and just go with it. This is very, very difficult. But if you start at a young age, you really understand how the world works. And you understand that you have to focus on your similarities and not your differences in order to resolve very crucial issues. Now, this is what an MUN is about. Why is Rotaract Global MUN different? Well, first of all, it has been underlined a lot of times today that Rotary and the United Nations have a very close link. Actually, Rotary today holds the highest consultative position at the United Nations. So it was more than obvious that there should be a Rotaract Global Model United Nations. And it is very, very different when Rotaractors from so many countries come together, sharing their Rotarian values and trying to make peace in the world. Most importantly, we really tried to make this conference real, as Mina said. We tried to make them realize the situation by actually taking them to places where they could see the refugees, for instance, and not just discuss the refugee crisis on a theoretical level. They felt their responsibility upon them. And now that is crucial. I'm just going to share, because I promised every delegate some of the points of the refugee crisis resolution. For instance, I'm talking about 18-year-old people. They actually suggested an emergency relocation plan from host countries and countries of transit, like Greece, Hungary, and Italy, to other EU member states, and the distribution shall be determined using objective and quantifiable criteria, including population, unemployment rates, and so on. Some other measures took into consideration the fact that, okay, refugee rights, we know them, and we should respect them always. But they took as a given the fact that refugees cross the borders, which it hadn't been done before. For instance, in Greece, my country, the borders are impossible to control. It's practically impossible. So the delegates took as a given that the refugees actually passed through the borders, and then they had an integration plan in a short-term and a long-term basis, like a year of mandatory induction to the new countries of residence, which included language, which included culture, and so on. So the point is, why did they try so hard? Why did I try so hard, and it is me standing here today and not anyone else? It's not because I'm better than any other young person, any other young Rotaractor. It's because someone, someday, somewhere, helped me believe that I could make a change. Just me, whether that was my teacher or my parents, someone somewhere made me believe that I could make a change, that very small changes can change the world. And this is what these Rotaractors did. When we told them that, okay, your voices will be heard, your voices will reach the United Nations today, they felt the responsibility upon them. And that is when they presented incredible results, incredible resolutions, which means that to you, Rotarians, to you a bit older people than us, you have to encourage young people, you have to make them believe that they have a voice, a very loud one, that they can change the world. They really can. From a small city somewhere in Greece, starting with their first MUN, so many years later, here I am. This could be any of you other Rotaractors tomorrow. And how do we make peace? I assure you that all the participants, if we have one future leader from that team in Belgrade, or the next team, the next MUN, no participant will ever start a war, because they learned otherwise. They learned how to work together and how to resolve their issues differently. This is how you make peace. So I would like to encourage you all to get involved, to spread the word, and remember that we all can be a gift to the world by making small changes, to just speaking up here today at the United Nations. We all can do it, and it is a great way to contribute to making peace, the Rotaract Global Model United Nations. I assure you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mina and Danae. I'm sure we're all very, very proud of our Peace Fellows, of our Rotaractors, and you said something that I think everyone should really pay attention to. Look around you, and if there are young people around you, give them hope and show them how they can join us. I did that when I spoke in Holland recently. I was a keynote speaker at a model UN conference with university students from all different countries. And I was very impressed by one young man who was the chair of the Security Council. He came from Israel. And I kept in touch with him. He just moved into New York. He's getting married next week, and he's sitting right over there because he's interested in finding out about Rotary Stand-Up Affair. And that's how you do it. Now I'm going to take one question from a few people. I wish we could go on longer. This has been I have to say, this has been a great panel. I'm very proud of all of you, and I'm very proud of you all for filling up this room. Yes, Marilyn, you're next. Do you have a microphone there? It's best to sit down and speak into the microphone.
Okay.
Quick question to a specific panelist, Marilyn.
Okay. It doesn't seem to be working, so... it is working? Okay. Okay, I'm sorry to make a scene here. I am Zone 32 representative to the Rotarian Action Group for... I guess it's to the Peace Fellow. Okay, I'm Zone 32 membership chair for Rotary Action Group for Peace. We have Facebook pages and all over the place, and I'd like to know how you got chosen, and do you think that Rotary would benefit with a Peace Fellow from the Mahand area, the Fatah area of Pakistan?
Thank you. I mean, very quickly, the selection process, I applied through my local club, then to the district, and then onwards and onwards. I think it's the same process now. I think it's, for what it's worth, from my perspective, it's a good process. I got to know the Rotarians at my local club. I actually can't remember how I got to know them, but I got to know them quite well. Bob and Madri Kars, they were great. So I don't know if, so in terms of how I was selected, that was... and sorry, in terms of the second part of your question about whether the program will benefit from a scholar from the federally administered territories in Pakistan. Look, I think the program would benefit from scholars from almost anywhere in the world. I don't think that there is any one region, probably particularly more than another. I think that those people who have had personal experience in their own countries with conflict can bring something, different to a program, absolutely. I think the program has done very well increasingly to make sure that the program doesn't always look like me, because the program shouldn't always look like me. The strength of the program is diversity, is what I'm trying to say. So the short answer to the question is yes.
Thank you. Matt?
Can you hear me, or is it? Okay, I'm Past District Governor Matt Sigmansson. I'm involved in a...
Who was the question directed to?
Oh, the question to these two young ladies here. I was very impressed with your presentation, and it's really, you guys, we need to hear from you, because you have been on social media and you have a whole different paradigm on how peacemaking can be made. And we are waiting for that to happen so we can have a more peaceful development. So please stay in contact with me, and I'll put you on my mailing list, and we'll see how we can work that out, because I think that's where we're going to have a change in paradigm.
Thank you, Matt. Yes. Speak into the microphone, please, and direct it to one panelist.
Yeah, my question is that any of them, that do Rotaracts think about a global society, because these flags of 193 nations have created the Departments of Defense or Department of War, I call them. There is no Department of Peace. Do you think that as a Rotarian, we should be talking about a global society where we have global citizenship?
Anyone who wants to answer that? That's why I'd like you to direct your question to one panelist. Darren, can you answer that?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, that's the short and probably most accurate answer. The longer answer in 5 words is that I don't think we're going to get rid of, and we probably shouldn't get rid of, nation states anytime soon. I'm not sure if you're going that far. But I think that increasingly, and to pick up on what the previous question was, I think that the differing modes of communications and sense of community now, there are different communities being built than 20 years ago that are being built through social media, through outreach. I think the much maligned millennial generation is, unfairly maligned in terms of this is a generation that is much more interested in social outreach, is much more engaged with communities beyond, my generation, your generation, other generations' concept of what community may have been. And I think expanding and understanding what we mean by community to that extent, exactly as my fellow panelists have been describing, is critical, and the tide is turning, and that's what's going to happen, so get on board.
Thank you. Is there anyone in the back there? I don't want them to feel they're lost back there. Anyone ask? Okay, in the very back, the man in the gray suit. Just press your button, speak into the microphone. Yes, and direct your question to one panelist.
Well, we have participants from area who is influenced by the conflict. From Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria, no. But many participants from Greece, from Balkan countries, Italy. So no, from the Asian countries, no.
We had participants who were from countries that were affected by the issues we were discussing in this particular conference. For instance, we did have a lot of countries that were affected by the refugee crisis, for that matter, and so on.
Okay. Thank you. Who are you directing the question to?
My question is for the two young, cute ladies to your right. I'm in Rotaract as well, and I'm going to the international convention this coming year. And I know there's a pre-convention for Rotaract. Do you know if they have a United Nations Rotaract model for the pre-convention or no? And if not, I think what are your thoughts about potentially setting one?
No, well, we will try to keep one per annual. So we will have one next year, and it will be in Bulgaria, in Sofia. And we will have a special edition here in March, in the headquarters of United Nations building, the same building we are sitting here. So maybe the year after that we can do at the convention.
Thank you. The young woman over there. Turn your microphone on.
As a Rotaractor,
press your button.
Just get close to it. As a Rotaractor and someone who is with people who have been motivated and influenced by these young ladies, how would you, or what would you recommend Rotaractors who are interested in this go about reaching out to the Rotary Club or getting involved in March, as you mentioned, for the one that's coming up, or in future ones?
Okay. First of all, I would like to encourage, as a Rotaractor myself, all Rotaractors to get involved in more international projects, because that way, generally international projects, that way you understand that everything is interrelated. A crisis in one side of the world could affect a country at the other side of the world, whether it is a financial crisis in Greece or a refugee problem anywhere else. Now, as far as it concerns this particular project, it would be great if your Rotary Club would support you and you could send as many people as you could in the next edition. But the applications will open soon online, and you can just follow by yourselves as well.
Thank you. We have 2 more questions. That man has been raising his hand constantly, so.
My question is directed...
Who is it directed to?
Is directed to Dan Ibeka, General Secretary Dan Ibeka. And to your point, I'm not only a Rotarian, but I belong to the Global Compact, UN Global Compact. And our organization, the Empathy Surplus Project, is a member of the Global Compact. And Rotaractors and Rotarians are encouraged to collaborate with the Global Compact. And since the Compact is global, that is another way that Rotaractors can get involved.
Thank you. That's important information.
So, yes.
One more on this side. I think after him we'll take a short question from you. Go ahead.
Is this working? Can you hear me?
Yes.
My name is Amir Asadi. I am the president-elect for the Rotary Club of the Bronx in New York. And my question is directed to Darren. Darren, with your experience, with the background that you shared with us about yourself, being in Afghanistan, what have you observed to be the reason for the impasse between the understanding of the rest of the world of that region? Because it seems to be impenetrable, and I don't think that throughout the history of humankind that we've had this kind of an organization or, cultural group that you just can't seem to be able to communicate with them, because it costs the world a lot of money and it costs the world a lot of emotional capital, and it is not helping them in any way, shape, or form. This cannot be sustained. Do you have anything to share with us as to what could the rest of the world do, including the Rotarians, to help that process?
I don't think, with all due respect, that there is a breakdown in the communication between the rest of the world and the Afghans, or vice versa. I just don't think that conversation happens very often. I think that the world, certainly for the last decade, if not for the last 3 decades, has viewed Afghanistan solely through a military prism, solely as a place where soldiers are sent to fight and sadly to die. And it's very difficult, if that's solely the focus, the lens through which you view any country, to actually engage in a conversation that is broader than the military one. It has been confused, I guess, very quickly at a more technical level by the fact that there have been, I guess, 2 missions running simultaneously in Afghanistan. There has been a military counter-terrorism mission that started with the US, that the US and allies have been running since 2000, 2001. That has a counter-terrorism objective. That's a very clear military objective. That's not about building a state. That's not about doing anything other than capturing, killing, disrupting a terrorist network. Running parallel to that, and very much parallel in that they don't really meet very often, if at all, is the operation that the United Nations is running, which is not a counter-terrorism operation, which is about trying to assist the Afghan government, the Afghan people, supporting them, supporting elections, supporting human rights efforts. That's a very complicated, very messy, as state building or assisting a nation to rebuild itself out of conflict is. But the news, and you can't really talk about this because not many people go to Afghanistan, so you don't see it firsthand. The news focuses on the first and then tries to interpret the second through the first. And you can't talk about a humanitarian mission if all you're talking about is a military operation. And, you know, you can't, and so as a consequence, when I disagree with you to the extent that we don't communicate with them, I think it's that the rest of the world, by and large, view Afghanistan as being a place where a military operation's going and humanitarian work is something that's not working. I don't necessarily agree with the second, but there is a fundamental disconnect there, but it's more in terms of a very complicated situation that is presented very simply by the media. You're not going to get the Afghan story in 30 seconds or less, you know, in between stories about a declining economy and a cat stuck up a tree. It's simply not going to happen. And that's unfortunate.
All right. Well, thank you so much. We have very little time. I wish I could stay here all day with everybody, but I promised you a short question. Who are you going to ask it to?
Either Darren or... All right. Either Darren or Carla can answer this. My name is Layla Bushkuk. I know, I felt bad. I was like, either one. Okay, so my name is Layla Bushkuk. I am from Rotary District 7410, that's Pennsylvania. So my question is, how do you plan, or how would you tell others to plan to involve youth as policymakers in regards to bringing peace for all in Rotary, in the United Nations, in like Rotary clubs, like in any way possible?
How to involve youth is basically the basic question. Well, I think there's many ways to involve youth. I think one of the panelists said here is listen to youth. Youth do have a voice, and they do have valid opinions. I feel so often working with high school students, we just shut them down, saying that they don't know anything, and it's simply not true. We need to actually listen to their ideas. I mean, there are just. I'm getting a barrage of ideas here, but giving youth the opportunities to study through Rotary programs, through other programs, no matter what it is, supporting them in exploring different possibilities. I think study abroad is a personal bias of mine. Exposing youth to another culture early on is very important. You know, our world is getting increasingly more diverse, and even in Vermont, where we are getting a lot more transplants, we call them, people don't know how to deal with those differences. So I think for me, the number one, to spare everybody some time, number one is expose them to different people.
Thank you. And we really have to end now. I want to thank you all for coming and filling up this room, the Peace and Conflict. As I said before, it gives me hope. If you look around the room, it'll give you hope too. And just hearing these panelists says it all. So thank you, and continue with your experiences in Rotary and supporting the Rotary peace efforts.